The evil black loan shark raised the child of the man who owed her money. It turned out that the loan shark was a good person. This is a story with emotional language, deep plot, and complex characters. Follow my channel to learn more stories. The sun beat down mercilessly on the cracked sidewalks of East Willow Street, where the broken windows and sagging porches spoke louder of despair than any words ever could. And among these crumbling remains of a forgotten neighborhood, there was one name that made people whisper and cross the street without looking back. Miss Loretta Kane, the black woman who ran the toughest, coldest loan business this side of the city. A woman whose glare could freeze even the boldest thug mid-sentence. A woman whose ledger was filled with names scribbled in red ink, each representing a debt that seemed to grow heavier with each missed payment. And though many cursed her name under their breath, none dared say it aloud within earshot of her tiny brick storefront, where a faded sign reading, "Kane Financial Services," swung in the dusty wind. Yet behind her reputation, behind the rumors that painted her as a heartless predator, there was a story brewing that no one could have predicted. A story that began on an ordinary Wednesday, when Loretta, with her sharp gray suit and her hair pulled tight into a no-nonsense bun, heard the desperate banging on her glass door and looked up to see a woman she barely recognized, Tanya Briggs, a frail slip of a thing who had once taken out a small loan for her sick mother and had disappeared months ago without a single payment, and now she stood there, barefoot, her dress torn, clutching a screaming infant to her chest, her eyes wide and wild like a hunted animal, and before Loretta could bark at her to leave, Tanya stumbled forward, nearly collapsing onto the dirty tile floor, gasping between sobs, "Please, Miss Kane, please. Take him, please." And with trembling hands she thrust the tiny baby towards Loretta, whose instinctive step backward was betrayed by the way her arms automatically reached out to catch the child before he could fall. And in that frozen moment, with the weight of the boy settling into her arms, Loretta felt something shift deep inside her, a crack in the armor she had spent decades forging. And as Tanya crumpled onto the floor, whispering incoherently about danger and no other way and "they're coming," Loretta glanced outside and saw the shadowy figures slipping between the abandoned buildings, moving closer, and without thinking she locked the door, drew the blinds, and called the only friend she trusted, Old Man Reynolds, who ran the pawn shop 2 blocks down. And as she waited, she rocked the baby awkwardly, feeling his tiny fists clutch at her lapel, and for the first time in years she did not think about interest rates or missed payments or repossessions. She thought only of the fragile life pressing against her, the impossible terror in Tanya's eyes, and the way the streets outside seemed to hum with a darkness she could not name. And when Old Man Reynolds arrived with his battered shotgun and a grim set to his mouth, Loretta knew without needing to ask that her life, once so neatly calculated and ruthlessly efficient, was about to veer off a cliff from which there was no return. And as she knelt down beside Tanya and tried to make sense of the broken fragments of her story, something about a boyfriend gone bad, debts to worse men, threats that left no safe corner to hide, Loretta realized that by taking the boy, she had made herself a target too, but for reasons she could not yet understand, she did not regret it. And when Tanya grabbed her hand with a strength that belied her frailty and whispered, "His name is Elijah. Don't let them find him. Don't let them hurt him," Loretta simply nodded, the weight of the promise settling heavier than any debt she had ever collected. And as the night deepened and the sounds of sirens and gunshots echoed down the hollow streets, Loretta Kane, the woman they all feared, sat in her tiny office rocking a baby to sleep, her mind racing not with plans of profit or punishment, but with something foreign and fierce and terrifyingly alive, the determination to protect this child at any cost. And outside, unseen, the forces that had hunted Tanya turned their gaze toward Kane Financial Services, and the battle for Elijah's future and Loretta's soul quietly began. Loretta didn't sleep that night, Her senses stretched taut as the low hum of danger vibrated through the walls of her office, and while Elijah whimpered fitfully in the bassinet she had hurriedly fashioned out of an old filing box and some blankets, she sat in the dark behind her desk, the heavy revolver she had not touched in years now resting cold against her palm. And when dawn broke in a dirty smear of orange and gray, she rose stiffly, locked the baby in the back room where no stray bullet could find him, and stepped outside to find the streets eerily empty, the normal shuffle of junkies and hustlers replaced by an unnatural stillness that made the hair rise on the back of her neck. And as she turned to re-enter her office, she spotted the first warning, a ragged piece of cardboard tucked under her door. It scrawled with a crude drawing of an eye and the words "surrender." And though her fingers trembled slightly as she crumpled the threat, her face remained impassive, the old steel returning to her spine, because fear was a luxury she had unlearned long ago. And if these men thought they could scare her into abandoning that child, they didn't know Loretta Kane. And so began the long days and longer nights of the siege, with cars cruising slowly past her windows, unfamiliar faces lingering too long on the corner, strange clicks and taps on her phone line. And though old man Reynolds stayed with her as often as he could, the old pawnshop couldn't run itself. And most of the time, it was just Loretta and Elijah against the invisible enemy tightening its noose around them. Yet amid the tension and dread, something unexpected bloomed, a bond between the hardened lender and the fragile child, who gurgled and cooed and clutched at her fingers with a trust so absolute it both terrified and healed her. And each time she fed him or changed his diaper or sang off-key lullabies to quiet his cries, Loretta found herself shedding layers of bitterness she hadn't even known she wore, and in rare moments of peace she would rock him gently and whisper promises into his soft curls, promises of safety and love and a future free from fear, even as she knew she was risking everything to keep them. And it was during one of these tender moments, when Elijah fell asleep with a tiny fist wrapped around her thumb, that she made a decision that would change everything. She would not just protect him. She would be his family, his shield against a world that had failed both of them, and no matter what blood or fire she had to walk through, she would not let him go. And somewhere, deep in the shadows, the men who hunted Tanya's son realized they had underestimated the woman they thought was just another heartless shark, and they began to plan accordingly. Loretta's first real confrontation came 3 days later, when a black SUV with tinted windows parked across the street and stayed there, engine idling. Its presence a dark reminder that the walls were closing in, and though no one stepped out at first, she could feel the weight of their eyes pressing against her, a silent dare woven into the stale morning air. And while Elijah napped in the back room, Loretta made a decision born not of recklessness, grabbing her coat and stepping boldly into the street, her heels clicking against the broken asphalt, the revolver hidden but close. And when the driver's side window rolled down to reveal a young man with hard eyes and a serpent tattoo curling up his neck, Loretta didn't flinch, instead folding her arms across her chest and staring him down with the full force of the woman who had once made grown men cry over a missed payment. And the man, flashing a cruel smile, said in a voice like gravel, "We just want what's ours, lady. Hand him over and nobody gets hurt." But Loretta laughed, a short, sharp sound that sliced through the tension, and replied, "You think you scare me, boy? I've dealt with devils meaner and smarter than you since before you could piss standing up." And something flickered in the man's eyes, a grudging respect maybe, but also a darker promise. And he said, "Last chance." But Loretta only turned her back on him and walked away, each step daring him to try. And though no bullet followed her, the message was clear. This wasn't over. And as she bolted the door behind her and checked on Elijah, still sleeping sweetly with his thumb in his mouth, she felt the gravity of what she was facing, knew that the days ahead would demand more from her than anything she had ever given, and yet somewhere deep inside, Under all the fear and anger, there was a fierce kind of joy too, because for the first time in a long time, Loretta Kane wasn't fighting for money or power or reputation. She was fighting for love, and that made her unstoppable. The days that followed blurred into a cycle of vigilance and tender care, Loretta moving through them with a grim determination fueled by the primal instinct to shield Elijah from the dangers creeping closer with every sunset. And it was on the fifth night, as the wind howled and battered the plywood boards she had nailed hastily over the front windows, that a different kind of threat emerged. Not the brute force of thugs in black SUVs, but the quieter, more insidious weapon of bureaucracy. When two sharply dressed men claiming to be from Child Protective Services knocked at her door just past midnight, their laminated badges flashing in the dim porch light, their voices syrupy with concern as they explained that an anonymous tip had been received about a child in her custody under unsafe conditions, and though every instinct screamed at her to slam the door in their faces, Loretta knew better, so she played their game, inviting them in with a politeness so brittle it could have shattered at a touch, offering them tea from a pot that had not been used in years, and all the while her mind raced, calculating, assessing, because she saw the truth in their too practiced smiles and the way their eyes flicked hungrily toward the back room where Elijah slept. And she realized with a sinking certainty that they were not there to protect him, they were there to take him, to hand him over to whatever devils Tanya had fled from, and so she stalled, asking endless questions, demanding paperwork, pretending not to understand their legal jargon until, at last, Old Man Reynolds appeared at the back door, his weathered face set like stone, a camera phone in hand, loudly announcing that he was recording everything for the mayor and the news if necessary. And in that moment the spell broke, the two men exchanging a glance before mumbling excuses and retreating into the night. And as Loretta locked the door behind them, her hands shook, not from fear, but from fury. A deep, righteous anger at a system that pretended to protect children while selling them to the highest bidder. And she clutched Elijah close to her chest, vowing that come hell or high water, no one, not thugs, not bureaucrats, not anyone, would ever take him from her. And in the days that followed, she fortified the office like a bunker, set up surveillance cameras Reynolds had found at a discount, and mapped out escape routes in case the walls closed in too tight. And through it all, Elijah thrived under her care, his laughter a defiant song against the darkness, his tiny fingers grasping at hope with every giggle and gurgle. And Loretta, once feared as the coldest woman on the east side, found herself transformed, not into someone weaker, but into someone immeasurably stronger, forged anew in the crucible of unconditional love. And as the storm clouds gathered on the horizon, Loretta Kane stood ready, a warrior in a worn gray suit, daring the world to try her. Week that followed was a merciless test of Loretta's will, each day sharpening into a gauntlet of new threats, anonymous phone calls that clicked into silence when she answered, the scraping sound of knives dragged across her storefront at night, the chilling realization that these men were not interested in negotiations but in intimidation and fear. Yet Loretta refused to bend, refused to show the crack they were hunting for. And as she reinforced the office with steel bars Reynolds welded himself and slept with Elijah cradled against her chest, she began to notice the change in herself, how the bitterness that had once hardened her heart had been replaced with something fiercer and brighter. A fire fueled not by anger but by love. A love that made her dangerous to those who had only known her as a loan shark. And it was during one of those sleepless nights, with Elijah snoring softly against her shoulder, that Loretta made the most reckless, most courageous decision of her life. She would go to them, the men who thought they ruled the streets, and she would end this with her own two hands, because hiding was no longer an option, not for her and not for Elijah. And so at dawn, leaving Reynolds to watch over the boy, she dressed in her sharpest black suit, pinned her hair into the tightest bun she could manage, and armed herself not just with her revolver, but with the grim certainty that there was no way back, only forward through the fire, and she walked straight into the heart of enemy territory. Down to the crumbling warehouse by the river, where whispers said Marcus Vane ran his empire of fear, and as she pushed through the heavy rusted door and the eyes of a dozen armed men snapped to her, Loretta Kane did not flinch, did not slow, but strode forward with a confidence so absolute that even the hardest men shifted uneasily in their seats. And when Marcus himself, a giant of a man with tattoos crawling up his neck and a diamond stud in his ear, stepped out of the shadows and said with a smirk, "Didn't expect the Ice Queen herself to come crawling," Loretta only smiled, cold and sharp as a blade, and replied, "I'm not here to crawl, Marcus. I'm here to end this." And there was a moment, a frozen heartbeat when no one moved, no one breathed, and then Marcus laughed, a low, ugly sound, and said, "You can't win this, old woman." But Loretta took another step forward, close enough now that she could smell the sour tang of whiskey on his breath, and said in a voice low enough that only he could hear, "You come after me or the boy again, and I will burn you down to ash, Marcus, and I won't use lawyers or cops or newspapers. I'll use the same tools you use, and I'll do it better." And something in her eyes, something ancient and merciless, made him take an involuntary step back, and though he covered it with another bark of laughter, Loretta knew she had planted the seed of doubt, the seed of fear, and as she turned and walked out, her back straight, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might split her ribs, she heard the silence behind her, heavy and uncertain, and she knew for the first time that she had won, not because she was stronger, but because she was willing to fight for something greater than herself. And as she crossed the broken streets back to her office, the morning sun struggling through the smog to paint the world in weary gold, Loretta felt something inside her settle. Not peace exactly, but a fierce kind of hope, the kind that could take root even in the ruins. And when she opened the door and saw Elijah lift his arms to her with a sleepy grin, she gathered him up, pressed her face into his soft hair, and whispered, "We're gonna be all right, baby boy, I promise you that." And, for the first time in a very long time, Loretta Kane believed it herself. Because she had stared down the darkness and walked away still standing, and whatever storms lay ahead she would face them, not as the woman who once loaned money with a sneer, but as a mother, a protector, and a warrior. And the city, broken, battered, and cruel as it was, would have to reckon with that. Loretta thought the worst had passed after her confrontation with Marcus Vane, but East Willow had a way of reminding its survivors that the streets were never truly tamed, and peace was a luxury paid for in blood and fear. So even as days stretched into a fragile, tentative calm, Loretta stayed sharp, her senses attuned to every whisper, every shadow moving the wrong way. And as she built a new rhythm for herself and Elijah, she found herself staring at the boy sometimes with a mixture of awe and fear, because loving someone this much was its own kind of terror, a vulnerability she had long ago buried under ledgers and threats. And yet every giggle from Elijah, every sloppy kiss planted on her cheek, every tiny step he took clinging to her hand, made that terror worth it, made her stronger and softer all at once. And as Reynolds helped her renovate the storefront into something closer to a home, installing battered couches, a proper crib, thick curtains to keep out prying eyes, Loretta dared to dream of a different future, one not dictated by debts and survival alone. And it was during one of those rare, quiet mornings, Elijah napping under a patchwork quilt, the shop filled with the comforting smell of percolating coffee, that a knock came at the back door. So soft she almost missed it, and when she opened it, heart already wary, she found herself staring into the sunken eyes of Tanya Briggs. Alive, but a ghost of the woman she had been, her frame skeletal, her hands trembling, her voice a broken whisper as she said, "Miss Kane, I need to see my son. Please." And Loretta froze, because every instinct warred inside her, the fierce urge to protect Elijah clashing with the painful truth that Tanya was his mother. And so she let her in, ushered her to the battered couch, where Tanya collapsed in a heap of bones and tears, and listened as she haltingly confessed the nightmare she had lived through, how Marcus's men had hunted her across the state, how she had survived by miracles and mercy from strangers, and how every breath she took since leaving Elijah had been filled with regret and prayers that he was safe. And as Loretta watched Tanya's thin hands twist in her lap, her eyes never rising from the floor, she felt the old hardness creeping back, but she shoved it down, reminded herself that true strength was not in cruelty but in mercy. And when Tanya finally lifted her gaze, filled with a hope so raw it nearly broke Loretta in two, she sighed and went to fetch Elijah, cradling him in her arms as he blinked sleepily up at her. And when she placed him in Tanya's trembling arms, she saw the way the woman shattered anew, saw the way love lit her up from the inside, and for a long moment they just sat there, the boy tugging at Tanya's tangled hair, babbling nonsense, while Tanya wept silently, and Loretta turned away to give them their moment, battling the selfish part of her that wanted to keep him forever. And it was later, after Tanya had fallen into an exhausted sleep on the couch, Elijah curled against her, that Loretta sat at the kitchen table with Reynolds, staring into the depths of her coffee and said, "What if I'm not enough? What if she takes him back and can't protect him?" And Reynolds, in his slow, steady way, just shrugged and said, "You do what you can, Loretta, and you trust the love you gave him to be enough." And though it wasn't the answer she wanted, it was the truth. And so, when Tanya woke, Loretta sat her down and laid out her terms in the voice that had once brokered deals across the bloodied streets, clear and unyielding. Tanya could stay, could rebuild her life, but if she ever let danger near Elijah again, Loretta would not hesitate to take him back, and Tanya, with tears brimming, agreed without hesitation. And so began a new chapter, messier and harder than Loretta had ever imagined. A makeshift family stitched together by survival and second chances, where mornings were filled with the chaotic noise of Elijah learning to walk and talk, and the careful rebuilding of trust between two women scarred by life. And though the streets outside remained cruel and broken, inside that battered storefront there grew something rare and precious, hope. And as Loretta stood one evening watching Tanya and Elijah stack colorful blocks with the serious concentration of engineers, she felt a warmth spread through her chest, a fragile, stubborn thing that whispered, maybe, just maybe, they had all found their way home at last. The seasons turned, and East Willow remained as battered and bruised as ever, its broken windows and hollowed-out buildings a grim testament to years of neglect and violence. But inside the fortress of Kane Financial Services, life blossomed in quiet, stubborn defiance of the decay beyond its battered walls. Tanya found steady work at a neighborhood diner, where the pay was meager and the hours long, but the dignity she earned with each cup of coffee served and each weary smile returned was priceless beyond measure. And Elijah, once a fragile, babbling toddler, grew into a bright, inquisitive boy whose laughter pealed through the dusty corners of the storefront like bells ringing hope into forgotten spaces. His small hands painting murals of suns and trees on the stained walls with crayons. Loretta bought from a second-hand shop, and Loretta herself, once the iron-fisted queen of East Willow's loan sharks, discovered a softer, humbler power blooming in the deepest recesses of her battered heart, a patience she had never known she possessed, a tenderness that took root like stubborn grass pushing through concrete, and it rewrote the very map of her soul, day by day, moment by moment. With every bedtime story told in a scratchy voice, every scraped knee kissed, every monster banished from under Elijah's bed. But outside their fragile sanctuary, the world did not forget the debts it believed it was owed. And some hatreds, like old debts, festered rather than faded. And one night, as autumn winds lashed dead leaves against the sagging windows, and a broken street light flickered in the choking darkness, trouble came pounding at their door once again. This time not in the form of thugs demanding payment or bureaucrats brandishing foreclosure papers, but in the primal violence of fire. A Molotov cocktail hurled through the front window with a sickening crash, the whoosh of ignition tearing Loretta from her restless sleep, her heart seizing in her chest with the cold claws of old terror. But she shook it off, mind clear and sharp, scooping Elijah into her arms, yelling for Tanya to follow, bundling them toward the back exit just as Reynolds, a fixture now, gruff and loyal as a half-wild dog, came charging through the rear alley with a battered hose and curses thick in the night air, and together they fought the fire, damping it down with wet towels, dousing it before it could consume the whole building, saving not just their shelter, but the fragile life they had fought so hard to build. And yet, as Loretta stood in the smoldering ruin of what had once been her office, the desk charred to blackened splinters, the old photographs of debts and repayments curling into ash, she realized with a clarity that stunned her, she could not protect Elijah here. Not forever, not against a world that hated what it could not control, and so she made a decision more profound than any she had made before. A decision born not of fear, but of love, fierce and unyielding. A decision to leave behind the streets that had shaped and scarred them, to seek a new beginning where Elijah could run through green fields instead of dodging broken glass, where Tanya could rebuild without fear lurking in every shadow, where Loretta herself could finally lay down the sword she had carried for so long, and with the help of Reynolds, who had a cousin with land upstate and a heart as battered and big as the sky itself, they packed what little they had, some battered clothes, Elijah's crayons, a box of ledgers Loretta couldn't quite bear to part with, and loaded it all into a battered pickup truck that rattled like a dying beast, and they drove through the night. East Willow's neon-lit ruins shrinking in the rear-view mirror until they were nothing but ghosts in the fog, and as the city gave way to open fields and dark forests whispering secrets to the stars, Loretta felt something she hadn't felt since she was a barefoot girl running wild through meadows long ago paved over by parking lots. Freedom, fragile and terrifying and beautiful. And when they arrived at the farm, a weather-beaten house crouched among rolling hills and ancient oaks, it was not grand, it was not easy, but it was safe, and safety was a kind of wealth none of them had ever known. And in the months that followed, they built a life from scratch, hammering and sawing and cursing and laughing, patching the roof with salvaged tin, planting a stubborn little vegetable garden that Elijah tended like a holy shrine, adopting a scruffy dog that showed up one morning with ribs showing and hope in its eyes, and day by day, nail by nail, seed by seed, they stitched a new world from the ashes of the old. Tanya enrolled in night school to finish her GED, her hands raw from double shifts, but her eyes burning with determination. Loretta started a small bookkeeping business for local farmers, trading ledgers of blood for ledgers of crops and hay and hope. And Elijah, oh, Elijah, he ran wild and free, his laughter rolling across the hills like a hymn, his shoes perpetually muddy, his face perpetually lit by some inner sun Loretta had never quite dared to believe in before. And in the quiet evenings when the sky burned orange and purple and the cicadas sang their endless, aching song, Loretta would sit on the creaky porch with a chipped coffee cup and watch the boy she had once cradled against the worst of the world's evils thrive in a place untouched by hate. And sometimes Tanya would join her, their conversation weaving through dreams and regrets and plans like a slow river. and they would speak of East Willow not with bitterness but with a kind of awed gratitude, for without its fires and shadows they would not have found each other, would not have forged this unlikely, imperfect, fiercely loved family. And as the years slipped by, Elijah grew tall and strong, his hands calloused from farm work, his mind sharp and restless. And Loretta aged too, her stride slowing, her hands curling into knots of arthritis, her hair thinning to silver threads, but her spirit remained unbowed, her heart fierce and unbreakable. And when at last her time came, when she lay in the little upstairs room filled with the soft scent of lavender and the low murmur of voices she loved, Elijah, now a man with broad shoulders and gentle hands, sat by her side and held her hand, and Tanya sat on the other side, her face wet with silent tears, and Reynolds too, hair gone white, voice rough with grief he did not try to hide. And as Loretta Kane took her final breath, it was not with fear or regret, but with a peace so complete it was almost holy. A peace born of battles fought and won, of debts repaid not in money but in love. And they buried her under the oldest oak on the hill, the earth rich and dark and forgiving, her grave marked not by marble or grandeur, but by a simple stone carved with the words, Loretta Kane, mother, protector, warrior. And in the years to come, as Elijah married and had children of his own, and Tanya built a little community center in town, and Reynolds finally retired to a rocking chair and endless mugs of coffee, they would tell the story of Loretta Kane to every child who asked. And her legend would not be one of fear or debts or violence, but of love, fierce and stubborn and unbreakable, the kind of love that builds homes from ashes, the kind of love that stitches families from ruins, the kind of love that saves the world, one broken, beautiful soul at a time. In the end, it wasn't the money she lent or the debts she collected that defined Loretta Kane. It was the life she saved, the family she forged, and the love she gave so fiercely that it burned brighter than any fire ever set against her. Some legacies are not written in ledgers, they are etched into hearts.